You busy, Terry? You're okay, okay. You're not busy, you're okay? Okay.
Okay, so far.
Hey,
I'll keep
just
an
give
eye
me
on
the,
him.
give me the high sign if you need.
The needle looks a little.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
That third shot? I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning after my third shot. I didn't feel the first two. And I did not feel good. So I took a couple Tylenol and I got up in the morning and taught all day. So I was fine. But I noticed the third shot.
Yeah, me too.
it tells me.
No, sir.
Okay, we're good.
I think we're good.
Okay. Let's call the meeting to order. This is a special session of the Ellensburg City Council for the evening of Monday, October 11th. The purpose of the meeting is to review and discuss land development code. I have not actually talked with either Kirsten or Heidi for what our actual process might look like or structure. And I see Jamie's on, so I don't know how he got roped into this. So why don't I I think what I should do is probably Heidi, turn it over to you, and then Kirsten and Jamie can start the conversation. I think part of the intent of this is that we started the conversation as a special, but 2 weeks ago or whenever. It was clear that we wanted a bit deeper discussion in terms of some of the concepts that were put in front of us. And so this is an opportunity, I think, to kind of work that through and perhaps provide some direction and for council to get feedback on what's perceived as the next steps.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. And I will start us out with a brief introduction. As the mayor mentioned, we brought this back to you for the first time a couple of weeks ago at a study session. It was clear council needs more information. Land use decisions are incredibly important part of council decision making, and so they deserve attention. And so we've reserved from 6 to 8 tonight an opportunity to walk through these. I just want to remind you that this set of revisions actually started out over 3 years ago, almost 4 years ago. And they are really, the goal was to fix some of the pain points for staff and for in our code, and to really create some practical pathways to do some consolidation of some of our zoning that makes more sense, so trying to streamline in areas. As you know, we just recently adopted the Housing Action Plan. Some of these revisions actually get us towards some of our goals and strategies in the Housing Action Plan. They're initial steps. What we want to do is make sure what is discussed here and what is put forth is not in conflict in any way with those, and our staff are very confident in making these changes. This is not a complete set of code changes that will fix all of the challenges we've come across over the years. But this was started several years ago. It's gone through a tremendous amount of planning and planning commission review, deep discussion. And so this is really your opportunity to learn more about what's in here. And it's been a couple of years since you've seen this. And so it really does deserve your attention. So Kirsten and Jamie have laid out really the process that the code so far has gone through in the staff report. And so we don't want to talk too much about process tonight. We really want to talk about content, the intent of the changes, and how they get us to where we want to go and where we know the council has laid out to go. So with that, I guess I would offer, I know Jamie and Kirsten are going to kind of tag team on this. And so I believe Kirsten is going to get us started.
Thank you, Heidi, for the intro. Kirsten Sackett, Community Development Director. So Heidi kind of briefed you on what you had found in the beginning part of the agenda report. And I know when we started the study session a couple of weeks ago, we realized we needed to just, step back a little bit and revisit why we even had this ordinance before you. And what we wanted to do tonight was just kind of give you some of the generalities of what we're proposing and give you some of the rationale, like some of the questions that we have received over the years about what uses are allowed where, and just recognizing that not everything aligned with the comprehensive plan goals. I do have the housing chapter of the comprehensive plan available. It did lead to a lot of the work, where it called for allowing for more uses and more zoning districts, things that are kind of called out in the housing action plan we have today. But we want to help you understand where we arrived at these decisions. And you, of course, have the entire ordinance in front of you, and we can talk about it topically, and when appropriate, dive into the actual ordinance to show you how, overall change, how that shows up in the code. But really, me and Jamie are both here just so we can each give you our own different perspectives of questions we've received over the years from people proposing to build a variety of different things and a variety of different zoning districts. And also just to have you hear it in more than one voice. Sometimes one of us can explain something a little bit differently and it might make more sense for you. So Bruce, do you have a way you'd like to proceed as well? Do you want us to give you the general overview of the broader changes? Did you want to start with questions? I don't know how many of you had a chance to read the report or if there's any areas of concern. You're on mute, Bruce.
Why don't we ask council how they might want to proceed? I mean, I felt like, we started the conversation, but kind of cut it short, both through time and because of content. So I haven't really thought through how we wanted to, clearly we started conversations with some of what was presented at that first special. Heidi or council, do you have any thoughts on how you'd like to proceed with this so that we have some concrete outcomes?
So I guess my recommendation would be to go through the presentation. I think Jamie and Kirsten have a framework that to talk about some of the whys and the hows and what the questions that they've been posed with.
Right.
That might be a good starting place to review that and then entertain questions.
Yeah, I think, because I don't think we got through the presentation because we started fielding questions. And some of what we got through, I know from working with the Affordable Housing Commission, and both of you have been sitting through that, tied directly to what, as Heidi indicated, there clearly are changes we'd like to discuss, I think, to implement the action plan. And then I think, going back to the other piece it just seemed like some of the others were philosophically fairly broad constructs in terms of change. And I think we need to recognize that a lot of what we've been identifying, I think both you and Jamie, when I've had conversations, have been the inconsistencies in what we had tried to accomplish in the initial major rewrite. So I think there's the piece of picking up the inconsistencies, aligning with our housing action plan, and then talking broadly about, what do we want to accomplish within the land development code to address not just affordable housing, but sort of vibrant neighborhoods, a sense of the walkability pieces, the smart growth principles that we believed we were incorporating, but may not have.
Can I ask just a strategy question? So I guess the way I was understanding this was that this has been through the public review process, and so it is coming to us as a start. If we wanted to incorporate some of the things from the housing action plan, that would delay getting this done because we would have to go through a public process for those changes. If we wanted to do it all together. Alternatively, I think what you're proposing is that we just adopt this and then start from there with tweaking it further to incorporate the housing action plan and maybe some other things that the Housing Commission wants to do.
So oh, go ahead, Kirsten.
I'm sorry, I was just going to say that's the proposal, because this started in an effort to meet some of the goals of the comprehensive plan. And the housing action plan that you just adopted last week kind of ties into this, but this ordinance was not developed, in tandem with the housing action plan at all. But we definitely want to go out and have more community conversations before we, as we figure out how to implement the housing action plan. But Heidi, what were you about to say? I'm sorry.
I was going to say yes to Councilmember Lowquist's comment that this is a package. Again, there's room for changing it and shifting it, but if we're going to do significant advances toward meeting the goals in the housing action plan, that's probably better off because it really trips off another sort of implementation of public process. And so again, we want to make sure that this aligns, and we believe it does. And it sets us up in a number of ways for advancing on some of our strategies. There's definitely more conversation that needs to come and more policy making that needs to come in order to enact the elements of the housing action plan, to do more with our code.
So
if I may, I need clarification. I'm sorry, but there's nothing, we've gone through a public process through the Planning Commission, right? This has not been submitted to SEPA or to Commerce.
no, and well, let me just step back and I'll just go through all of it, kind of take you through the staff report. We have additional time today. Would that be all right, Bruce?
Well, I don't know if we need, I'm grappling once again. I mean, the public process is potentially an opportunity for public input. It's planning commission review. It's all those things. Public process can also mean that we've submitted it for SEPA, which was part of our confusion going into the initial meeting.
Yeah. So,
so to Nancy's point, yeah, there has been public process, and to Heidi's point, there absolutely has. But there's nothing in what's being presented to us at this point that we could not ask for modifications for that would allow us to move forward in a relatively expeditious manner.
that's true.
So any
yeah.
changes recommended this evening or moving forward would simply need to be incorporated and come back to us ultimately in an ordinance or be submitted for review. But in terms of public process, we're actually following an appropriate public process, which is Planning Commission has reviewed. There have been recommendations from staff, and now it's at a council level for review and consideration.
Yeah, so let me step back just a little bit. So as Heidi said, we did have those 12 work sessions. And then we did take it back to the Planning Commission one more time, twice last year. And then we started trying to make sure we had everything in line for the SEPA process and realized the amount of work that it would take to do SEPA. And so now that we are at a point where we're ready to process SEPA, we wanted to, I apologize, turn off my ringer. We're at a point where we wanted to make sure that council was reminded of the past work, that you were aware of the potential changes before we initiated SEPA. So if you guys came out of this meeting tonight and or any future meetings and decided you wanted to make some modifications to this ordinance, there's certainly time to do that. And we just wanted to do that before we went to SEPA. We didn't want to take it through that opportunity and then get it to you and it wasn't quite something that you supported. And so we do need to send it to the Department of Commerce, and we will likely do that around the same time that we either start SEPA or directly after that. It usually depends on if there's some deadline coming up, but we'll probably want to make sure we get through SEPA first in this instance and then send it to Commerce. But, I would like to take you through, your agenda report is only 2 pages, and I could go through that a little bit, give you some background, and then provide the general context of it, and then allow you to ask questions.
And just to Heidi's point, you do have a presentation that you could walk us through. There was a deck of slides that we started to go through.
There was a deck of slides.
It was something. There was something we were looking at. I don't know what it was.
There was a PowerPoint.
If I may just break for a moment, I just need to let council know. You all look like these mini people sitting at the dais to me. And I know if I'm on where I think I am, I'm this large head.
Like Oz.
So I can't even see Rich. He's totally out of my screen. And so if you do want to input, kind of like what Nancy just did, just jump in. I can't recognize people or do any of the normal process.
This is Mary. I have a question. May I ask?
Yeah, I'm telling you, I can't see hands. I can't see body language. I can't do any of that.
I'm speaking. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I want to know, are we voting on this tonight? No. So we do have an opportunity to discuss it tonight. And
Tonight is a discussion. That's the purpose of tonight. Get your general feedback. If there's small tweaks we want to make, or if there's direction we need to go in a completely different path, we can set up a plan for doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll shut up, and Kirsten
We
and Jamie.
do have the slide deck, and we will pull it up if need be, but basically, we just kind of want to go through it. We want to discuss it and share some maps and talk about some challenges that we've encountered over the years trying to answer questions. You know, we always like to try to help people get to yes with a development question, but sometimes things are just outright not permitted, and there's nothing we can do about that. And sometimes things make sense, but the code won't allow for it. So we've just tried to identify some areas that we could improve that would be compatible with adjacent uses and things like that. But I did want to start by sharing with you really quickly a reminder of the goals and policies from the housing chapter of the plan. Are you seeing that chapter 2 here, goals, policies, and programs?
yes,
Okay. All right. So quickly.
We can see it, but we can't read
you
it.
can't read
Okay.
it.
Okay. Well,
I'm the.
I'll go as big as I can. Can you see it?
That's better.
Okay, I'm not going to like talk through all of them, and it's not that some are more important than others, but some of them go towards what we're talking about tonight. And I'll just tell you, the first goal says to preserve, protect, and strengthen the vitality and stability of existing neighborhoods. So that's a goal, and we have policies and programs to help that, you know, with integrating new development that complements existing neighborhoods, provides effective transitions. I know that Mary's spoken to that in the past, encouraging infill development. I'm going to go past that a little bit. That's an important one. But this one right here, goal H2, kind of aligns with our housing action plan. And it's kind of what we're getting at with what we're proposing to change in the code. It states to allow and encourage a variety of housing types and densities to meet housing needs of all economic segments of the community. So the first policy in here is to review the land development code to allow for a wider variety of housing types. So we've started to do that, and the ordinance gets at that. But the housing action plan also specifically calls that out as a strategy that we need to, you know, take action on very soon. And then this first program states to review barriers to the development of denser housing types such as duplexes, townhomes, and accessory dwelling units. Also, encourage residential development in commercial and mixed use zones, especially those within proximity to transit. So this one is talking about what can we do with our, you know, commercial highway zone, the mixed use zones, which would currently be CC and CC2, and the residential office zones. What can we do to encourage residential development there? And Bruce, this first program talks to expanding the multifamily tax exemption, which is also called out in our housing action plan. Evaluating, revising, and publicizing the density bonus incentive program, also called out in the housing action plan. So those are just a few, I'm not going to talk through all of them, as I said, of the items that we were trying to address when we began reviewing this with the Planning Commission. They are tasked with land use and making recommendations to City Council. So even though they held those many meetings, this is what they would like to present to you for consideration, and we want to work together to look whether we want to modify that or not. Going to page 2, well, I guess in your agenda packet, it would actually be page 3. It talks to the general changes. And so I'm going to talk through all these, and I'm going to let you know how they kind of blend together with the changes to the code. And we're going to interject with like some actual examples that we've encountered in real life. I'll share screen. Jamie will speak to some of this as well. But the first one on page 3, the first bullet point was adding 2 new mixed use zoning districts. So as we just saw in the comprehensive plan, it called for allowing for mixing of uses. So we developed two possible mixed-use zoning districts. And they're a neighborhood scale one and a regional scale. And we have very specific areas where we would want to do that. I'm going to talk through a little bit what that means to the code, and then I'm going to have Jamie speak to a little bit about how we arrived at that. But one thing we'd have to do within the larger ordinance is in chapter 15-300, it just describes all of the different zoning districts and the purposes. So we would propose to add the two new mixed use zones and then add mixed use as a new category and just reorganize the whole chapter. Because right now it's under residential, commercial, and industrial for generalities. We would add mixed use. And for instance, we would take the CC and CC2 out of commercial and put it in the mixed use one. We have a land use table. It's in 15-310. And you look in the table to find out what uses are permitted. So we need to add two new columns to that chapter of the code. And then we also have some other specific requirements that would come into play that are specific to those mixed use zones. And in the end of the ordinance, we do have the actual zones or like the areas that we're proposing it for. But I actually want to start with the area that we would be proposing for the neighborhood mixed use. And I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to let Jamie talk to you a little bit about the notion of changing this half of Ruby Street to this mixed use area. And I'll let Jamie take over for a moment.
Okay, well, thank you. So as everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. As Kirsten was saying, we trying to give some real life examples of where this becomes problematic. Well, it's either problematic or it's difficult. We see uses that make sense and would work well, but the way that our code is drafted, it's not allowed. So on the east side of down there is one of the most common questions that come up that we deal with is the Nights Inn hotel. There isn't hardly anybody interested in obtaining this property and either remodeling or tearing down the hotel and putting a motel back in there. It failed for a few different reasons, but there's been a lot of interest in different developers contacting us. What would it take to turn this into apartments or putting some multifamily in there? Well, it would take a zone change and a comp plan amendment, and it just is a long process and it scares most of the people away. So there's just on this entire street on Ruby there's already a mixture of residences and some of your Les Schwab and a daycare and different things. So it really fits the character of mixed use, and it's one of those that's had a lot of interest and a lot of disappointment with people seeing how difficult that would be. So many hoops and so many steps in the process to even get to that point that they walk away from it. So instead of getting something contributing to our town, we have something that continues to grow as more of an eyesore. So this looks like one positive example of where just a small change in the code would allow a lot more flexibility. And there's several other I call them safety factors or things. They're not just going to have a free for all. We have the development code already in place that's going to require certain requirements of how the development will look and setbacks and things of that nature, but and densities.
Question,
yes.
Jamie. You touched on a comp plan amendment. I thought we had changed the underlying land use in that area that would allow the rezone for residential, or do we need to go through?
We do, but we have to be careful on if it's just the single parcel and doing a spot zone, that would be,
No,
get us in
yeah, I
trouble.
wasn't thinking of a spot zone. I was thinking, I mean, I'm fine with where you're going with mixed use. My
Sure.
question was whether to do that requires us to run a comp plan amendment, because I
On
thought
this
that
particular,
we
sorry.
had gone through that with Angela, where we had changed a number of underlying land use designations.
And we did.
Yeah,
And everything that we did to amend the future land use code, future land use designations was leading to the ability to do this very thing with mixed use zones.
Right.
And-
But without a comp plan amendment,
Well, we already did the comp plan
did that.
amendment.
That's what
allow-
I'm asking. I just,
Yeah.
all I heard was, I thought Jamie referenced a comp plan amendment. And I'm clarifying that we would just need to rezone.
Yeah, it's if somebody came in and wanted to, try to change the motel property or the residential. You have this huge mixing of uses on this
Yeah,
stretch of
I'm fine with it.
street. And
And
so,
the question I had was on that, all the properties east of Ruby between the restaurant and the corner of Mountain View, are those all the same? Are they CH or CT? Are
they're
they-
all commercial highway,
Okay,
including the residential and the daycare. And so it's an eclectic mix. And later we can look at the actual map changes that we're proposing, but we just wanted you to see the different types of uses on this map here that we're sharing.
I was just going to say that I think this is a good example, I think, because what we see is such an unusual mix of uses in the same zone, which really doesn't reflect the zone at all. So I think this mixed use approach is far more flexible and probably going to give us what we want going forward.
And that's the approach we were taking, and that's what we wanted to present. And honestly, this is the only area of the city we're proposing that mixed use. It's neighborhood mixed use. And then we have a couple other areas that we're proposing would be appropriate for regional center mixed use. So just wanted to speak to that a little bit. And while we have this map up, I'll just jump into another one. We've been looking at uses. People call us about this property over here. I believe, Jamie, was this Clean Image over here? And
it was, yeah.
other uses. There used to be a money lending place here. This is residential office in this color. And we have had to tell people numerous times that they cannot put in an office here because it doesn't meet what the land development code allows for and from the use chart. And when we've asked questions about this, our understanding is this used to be a residential area and it was houses and farming, but the general nature of Mountain View Avenue has become very much a commercial highway type of use, and it feels very appropriate to allow people to put different uses here. And a lot of people have called and they've come and gone, and there's a lot of vacant buildings just sitting right here, and it's unfortunate. So you'll see on the maps later that we are proposing to change all of this to commercial highway. Not this because it's condos, but then this as well, the properties over here. And then even across the street, this purple is called, it's commercial neighborhood. We'll get to that in a little bit. This is the movie theater and Biomart. We would like to change that to commercial highway as well, and match up with the fire district building right here and the rest of the commercial highway. And so you see our whole premise is that these uses are going unused, or these buildings are going unused because the nature of the neighborhood has changed, but the land use chart has not kept up with those neighborhood changes. So,
Kirsten, I had a question related to that. I know it's out of the frame and you don't need to go much beyond, but I'm just curious, is what I've heard over the last several years is as we go further east toward Chestnut, all the way up to the hospital, the KVH has a long-term expansion plan to acquire as much of that land as possible. And how does the zoning fit with that? Would that be CH or would it be something else?
we haven't proposed any changes to that. I was part of a lot of the master planning meetings with the hospital a few years back, and they were looking to expand to the south and build some new buildings, acquire some single family homes. And when it came down to it, after all the research, there were some covenants in place that the property could only be used for single family. So the hospital has approached us with a new plan that just kind of stays on their existing campus. So we haven't proposed any changes adjacent to the hospital. It's a good question because that was up for discussion in the past.
So for those parcels that they've acquired, the single family residences, I assume under whatever the current zoning is up there, they can redevelop those lots into some sort of medical.
So at this point, I'm not familiar with every single property that they purchased. I know that they do have a lot of homes that have been converted, but a lot of times, let me look at the code. I believe that those medical office uses are probably allowed where they have them.
Okay. I didn't mean to get off track, but I appreciate that.
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna stop sharing this one. That was just an example.
Well, if I may though, just quickly, just to the north of what you would propose as being commercial highway, there's a huge vacant lot. It's in a different zone. It's
This one,
yeah.
that
What
is
is-
manufactured home park.
No, there's a large vacant lot to the east of the manufactured home park.
So are you talking about this?
That parcel, yes.
That has that zoning. It's just never been developed.
Yeah, so would it, if we're looking at rezone at the same time, I know that manufactured home was part of the conversation about potential addressing affordability, and I don't know the owner, I don't know any of the underlying pieces, I don't know why it hasn't sold, I don't know any of those things, but that's a significant piece of open infill that, I mean, would that be appropriate if we were, for instance, looking at CH along the yellow, to have that become residential office, for instance?
Well, that's a possibility, but I will say that we did end up adding to the housing action plan that we should identify additional areas of the city that would be appropriate for manufactured housing. And we also wanted to improve the standards for manufactured home parks. So I think that could be a different conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good one, but I think we should, it would hold this one up quite a bit. If we
Okay,
want that.
thanks.
Okay, going back to the report that we gave you, we did also propose to eliminate the commercial tourist zone. And I don't know how many of you recall, but a few years back, we had a comp plan docket request that was to rezone the property at the west interchange from commercial tourist to commercial highway. And we told them at that time, the council, you chose not to docket it. And it was told that that wasn't the appropriate process, that it would need to be more of an area-wide rezone because they weren't asking to just rezone one parcel. It was like the whole general vicinity. And I'm actually going to now refer to one page of the ordinance. It's page 56 in your packets. It's part of the ordinance. So I realize you probably, I'll zoom in just a minute, but just to give you a feel, like right here's the roundabout to get you on the I-90. And we have a lot of property that is currently zoned commercial tourist. All of this is. And the proposal that we're presenting is to just eliminate the commercial tourist zone and just call it commercial highway. And that would align with this light pink adjacent to all of that. And we spoke to this briefly at the last study session, but what we would do is in the land use chart is just completely get rid of the commercial tourist column, and any use that was allowed in either the commercial tourist or commercial highway, it would all be allowed in the commercial highway. So, and there's not that many discrepancies, but there was enough that it made it problematic and challenging for developers to put uses in the commercial tourist zone because it was really geared to the traveling public, not so much about business support and things of that nature. So that's another fairly large one. It also would be eliminating from 15,300, where we describe what the commercial tourist zone is. And it would trigger a few other places where we would need to delete reference to the commercial tourist zone. But are there any questions about that particular change?
Yeah, can you show us where all of the commercial highway, what would become commercial highway? So CHCT is spread through.
Yeah, I'll show you. So you have it on both interchanges, and right now I'm just showing you the west interchange. So everything in the hatch marks, I mean, can you see them? It's page 56, all of that. And then I believe it's, sorry, I know you don't like the scrolling while I'm, then south of town. So this is Canyon Road. This is Lakeshore Way. So Carl's Jr.'s over here. The new hotel's being built here. So all of this in pink is commercial highway. And then this darker purple color with the hatch marks is a commercial tourist. So the proposal is to also change that to commercial tourist.
Commercial.
And
Commercial.
highway.
I'm sorry, commercial highway, yeah. And this is the same map where it's showing you that, like what we just looked at on Ruby Street would be changed to the neighborhood center mixed use. But
So there's also commercial highway along University Way as well, right? And it's not just at the two interchanges.
well, that's only commercial highway. That would stay because that's what we're wanting to keep as commercial highway. We're just trying to eliminate commercial tourist.
So I'm not sure if this is the right time, and Bruce, you can cut me off and redirect if you need to, but when I look at the use tables for commercial, on page 22 of 53. So in commercial highway, you're adding a permitted use for super scale over 60,000 square foot floor area to the commercial highway zone. And after spending 4 years of my life debating that whole concept, tell me that this doesn't mean big box stores anywhere, including along University Way, both interchanges, permitted outright, no conditions.
And that's what, I mean, that's something we could talk about, but that was one of those things where if it was allowed in the commercial tourist, we would put it into the commercial highway, but we could, that's something you could.
Big box stores was never allowed in the commercial tourist or commercial highway without the overlay zone.
Yeah, we have the regional retail overlay zone, and we haven't had anybody take advantage of it. We modified that section of the code 4 years ago. And you're right, there's like very specific areas where you can do that. That said, this is still a use.
What I'm seeing here is that big box stores are allowed, permitted, no conditions in the CH zone anywhere without any of the nuance that the regional retail overlay would require.
That's correct. If it would fit on the site, and thinking about the regional retail, that's one where it's a variety of different buildings, at least 100,000 square feet in size, and at least one of them has to be 50,000 square feet. So like that's a really specific thing. So yeah, Nancy, this is completely separate on its own. Like, a large store that size could come in as a permitted use unless you stated that you would like to consider otherwise.
Right. So I think what Nancy said, I mean, we're not, again, to Mary's point, we're not voting this evening. We're providing direction. Is that not accurate?
Yeah.
I'm finding it, I mean, we did spend 4 years as a community talking about when and where to allow big box stores, and that this would just appear as a little P in the use table without calling it to our attention. I just am kind of, it does, you weren't here, you didn't have the pain of going through those conversations, but I did. And it is more than just, it's it's not that simple. I don't see how we can.
No, we know that. And we're trying to just like present it to you at a larger scale and then zero in on the details. Because there's a lot of changes to the use tables themselves that I think would be appropriate to go into. And I will note that, and whatever direction you give us that's what you give us, and then we'll go down the path we need to. But I'll just say a lot of the members of the Planning Commission were around for all those same conversations too. And there was a lot of really useful, interesting discussion. But yeah, and I wasn't trying to like not point that out. I'm just trying to give you the bigger picture of it, because later in the memo, I did want to point out the fact that there's a lot of changes to the use tables and we can look at those closer. I just know that when we get to the use table, you guys are gonna have a lot more questions, because that's not the only change to the table. So
But I guess, again, just, I mean, if we're looking for concerns that are being raised by council as you're going through this, I think
Yeah.
that simply needs to be noted. We're not needing to close on that.
Yeah.
And we haven't gotten to the use tables, and I appreciate that. But I think Nancy's point is valid. I mean, that
oh,
nearly,
absolutely.
the 4 years that she alludes to probably in certain ways led to the council that we have today. So I think we need to be somewhat sensitive to that observation.
I would agree with that.
Absolutely. I'm sorry, who spoke?
No, I agree. I think especially the super scale, I think the 20 to 60 raises questions, but that 60 and above is a whole nother animal. So. And I would point out, not just on the CH, I think the same issue could be raised on the mixed use commercial. Same issues. That building that scale, I think, is really significant.
Yeah, and as you call them out, we will, I'm highlighting them. We'll figure out what we want to do for further discussion on them. Just wanting to make sure we can get to all the topics. And in the memo, I noted just a couple of the zoning changes, but because I'm on the maps, I do want to go through the rest of the zoning changes that we would be proposing with this. I believe these are the last two. Okay. So those were the ones where we would change the zoning district from commercial tourist to commercial highway, is these two near the interchanges. And I'll just go upwards. This is one that I just spoke to as well when we were looking at that other map. So these are the properties on Mountain View Avenue, and then also the Bimart Theater area that we would propose to change to commercial highway. Are there any questions or discussion on that before I look at the next one?
May I ask a question? Why are you leaving a space between the two crosshatched orange ones?
There are some existing condominiums right here. And then,
Okay, I wasn't coordinating on where it was on the map.
oh
Okay,
no, that's okay. That's a great question, because it does look odd. Why would we do that? But it's just trying to complement the existing use that's right there.
I know, okay.
I have a question on the west interchange when you go back to that slide, but it can wait until you get there.
Well, I mean,
Right there.
let's go back to it.
So down at the bottom there, where the crosshatch stops on Dollar Way,
Mhm.
it appears on my map that the shade of pink or purple, the out to the east of that is still matching what's under the crosshatch. I could be wrong, but what is the plan for that little piece that stops on Pot Road?
I'm gonna have to stop sharing and pull up my zoning map so I can better answer your question.
It's not that important. I just saw the crosshatch stop, but it ends up.
No, it's a good question. It shouldn't take me more than a minute to pull it up.
Oh, yeah, and the darker purple is planned unit development.
We're not planning to do anything with that at the moment, just simply because it's property owned by the Yakima Nation.
So it
We
just
don't.
zoned it.
We talked about changing that one too. We just want to get permission from the property owner because we don't even have PUD in our zoning district, period. But I mean, that's a great observation, and we've had discussion on that. Okay, I've got the answer to your question. David, in fact, I will share my screen with the actual just regular GIS map. This property right here is what you're referring to. It's owned by the city of Ellensburg, and we actually are going to rezone that as well, but we're going to, in addition to what's in this ordinance, we have 11 other properties that we will do rezones on as site-specific rezones. And there's several city of Ellensburg owned properties that we will process their own SEPA and rezone.
Okay.
Um,
Are those,
yeah.
would that be public reserve then?
I'd have to get to it. I don't recall.
I think that one is because it ties in with the levy project.
Okay, yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that's perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, great question. Okay, let me go back to. Okay. Sorry for the scrolling. Did anyone have any more questions on this one? Of Mountain View. Okay. This other one's in the downtown area, and we did reach out to the actual property owners. Some of them participated in meetings we had. I'm going to zoom out here just a minute so you can see more of it. But we've got Fifth Avenue and Water Street right here. The darker blue is the central commercial. The light blue is central commercial 2. And this gray is light industrial. Now, the property right here in the darker blue is one of the, and this one, these are 2 of the Patricia Place properties. And we had a lot of discussion at all the meetings about the idea of expanding the central commercial zone. And the notion was to change this light industrial to commercial. So this is Kittitas right here, Kittitas Street. And then you got the Twin City Foods right here. And then I think this was functional junk salvage there, I believe. And then also change this CC2 to CC. And we did have discussions about going all the way down to a little bit further down here, but we ended up arriving at this. The property owners here specifically requested to stay light industrial based on the uses that they had. And so even before we change, potentially change the MFTE program, any properties that are rezoned to CC would have the lesser parking restrictions and be eligible for the MFTE program, the multifamily tax exemption program. So are there any questions on that one?
Yeah, I do. So expanding the physical zone versus just allowing the tax credit for CC, all of CC2. Was that discussed? I mean, wait, I thought we were headed towards just expanding into all the CC2.
Yeah, that will be a completely separate conversation that will come to you in the near future now that we've studied out the 20-year program. And I think Bruce wants to speak to it, but there's other allowances that the parking restrictions are less. And that's very appealing to a lot of the developers.
Right. So what does this ordinance do with the multifamily? Does it expand it to CC2? I couldn't tell from the.
This does nothing for the MFTE, but because we'd be increasing the amount of property zone central commercial, these properties would all then be eligible for the MFTE program as soon as the zone change went into effect.
Okay.
And let's just say that happened before you expanded the MFTE program, that would just give them the opportunity sooner. But if we need to have a lot more discussion on this, we might get the MFTE one through sooner.
So another question, the light blue area south of 5th and west of the industrial that is like sort of underneath your little label, current zoning,
Mm-hmm.
Why is that not changing? Why is that staying CC2?
It was based on conversation that we had with the property owners at that time. I would need to pull down my map, but does anybody recall the exact use right here?
Are those Are you talking about the corner of Fifth and Water?
South of Fifth.
Third. Are you talking about here? Underneath?
Right at the
No,
very top of the
no,
screen.
up above.
Top of the screen.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Which one? This?
And what, yeah.
Residential house.
Those are
Yeah, I think
residential.
they're individual. Yeah.
That property owner has wanted to maintain their existing use there.
Okay.
Yeah. At the time, Angela sent out notices to everybody that was in the potential area for zoning change. And we're just trying to be, honor what the property owners were interested in doing, if possible.
So if I may, I mean, I don't know that there's a downside to doing this, but just for council's awareness, the Affordable Housing Commission passed a motion requesting council consider the multifamily tax exemption for CC2 at its last meeting. And I don't know what the process is to get it. And that can be, my understanding is that can be done by resolution because you're not actually changing the zone. You're just increasing an existing program.
Jamie, do you want to quickly explain what the process would be?
Sure. Just because it's fresh in my head from our last meeting, it is going to be brought forward to council. There is a resolution that can be put together for identifying a residential target area. So we'd have to identify that through resolution. And then there would be another step to actually make it effective because our MFTE program is codified by ordinance. So we would have to adopt the resolution is to identify that area as CC2. And then the ordinance change would be to change the ordinance to reflect allowances of both in the CC and the CC2. So it's kind of a two-step process, but the first part of it was the resolution, the directive from affordable housing to get it in front of council to consider a resolution to identify the CC2 as an expanded residential target area.
Which would also be consistent with the comp plan that Kirsten shared. So the only, assuming that conversation would happen, the only advantage, Kirsten, as I understand it, then, really are the parking requirements and setbacks. I mean, there are some distinct advantages potentially for developers in the CC zone.
Yeah, there's some different allowances that they seem to find helpful. Yes. And if you want a listing of all those, we could, I don't have them up.
Oh, no, I don't care. I mean, I think I know some of them, and I know that they're advantageous, I think, for the developers. So this is, I mean, it's a relatively small number of parcels. I don't think it's heartburn one way or the other, truthfully.
Is there any other feedback or questions from council before I move on?
Move on.
All right. This one is, I know that we said we're going to do some other unique ones, but this is some city-owned property. And we can do this through the ordinance, but you're probably all aware that the city now owns this. This is Enterprise Way, Dollar Way Road, and this is where we purchased property as part of constructing the new levee. So it's currently zoned light industrial, and we're proposing it to be public reserve. Are there any questions about that? And it would align with the property across the street where we've also got levee work done. Okay. Another one is over in West Ellensburg. So you got 5th and Railroad right here. And all of this is zoned light industrial. And I don't know when, honestly, when that zoning district was assigned, but all of these properties have single family homes on them. And they were all contacted about whether or not they would like to be light industrial or have a match up with the rest of the properties around them, which is residential low. And originally we're like, well, let's keep off these end pieces. And we had even included this one, but the property owner himself on this property here came into the city and he's like, no, I want that residential. So We made sure we contacted all of them, and that's what they would like to do. And they don't have plans to have their houses demolished or sell them off. But are there any questions on that one?
I like it.
Any other feedback?
Good.
Okay, great. So those are all of the zoning changes that would come forward through the ordinance. And stop share just for a moment. On page 3 of your packet, there are also, this is where we'd get into the land use charts. And just because like over time, we've identified problem areas for zoning. And what we'll probably do is,
Sorry, Kirsten, what page?
Was the page number?
it was page 3. It was just the last bullet point. It's just saying revisions to the land use charts
Okay.
to accommodate for those uses that we've received questions on over time. And that was a really short way of introducing you to the land use charts and all of the possible changes. And so we can go through the charts, but we also wanted to give you first just a couple of examples of areas where, you know, people might have called us and we were like, sorry, you can't do that. And I guess I'll start with one that I know there's a lot of discussion on. We have in the code, in fact, let me share the code portion first. Apologize here. I tried to have more than one of the ordinance open so I could go back and forth easier. Okay. Like I said, there's a lot of discussion on this, but I'm going to share a portion of the code with the land use charts. Can you see them?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So the RS and the RL, they currently allow for single family cottage dwellings. And then we had allowed for duplexes and townhomes with some conditions. And the one that we kept butting up against was regarding duplexes. It said that they had to be on lot, and this is a strike through if you can't read it, but I'll read it. It says, duplexes are permitted on lots that are at least 10,890 square feet in area, or they're a corner lot where building entries are provided on a separate street. And we received numerous calls from folks on a few different properties. And here's one, for instance, that is on Water Street. And this is Helena up here. And so the yellow is residential low, and the green is residential suburban. And you know, some of you have probably driven down there and seen like these tiny houses. Like there's 3 tiny houses here, and there's this dilapidated vacant duplex right here. It's just sitting there looking awful. And we have to keep telling these folks you can't have a duplex there. When what we'd like to be able to do is let somebody have a duplex. You know, this is 8,276 square feet, but it's not 10,680 or whatever that number was. What we would like to allow is them to present a plan that shows they can meet the parking requirements, the setbacks, and the open space, and allow them to design something that fits the lot. So what that does is it would mean, okay, let's look at changing what the conditions are surrounding whether you can have a duplex in those 2 zoning districts. And so what we're proposing would be to make them a permitted use. And keep in mind, this is really for infill lots. So if somebody were to come forward and find a lot that it's just kind of a weird one, it's not being developed, this would allow them to propose that. Somebody might want to just have a single family home, but we've had a few questions on duplexes. So what we've put in here is, regardless of maximum density in the density and use table in another section, duplexes and townhomes are permitted in the RL and RS zones on lots that have been recorded as of December 31st, 2020. And so this would allow for anything that's pre-existing to move forward with that. And that doesn't necessarily mean any of the brand new subdivisions can do that, but we're trying to help for infill development here. So, and I brought that up because I know it's one that there's a lot of discussion around. So that's like just one use.
Kirsten, I had a question, and it's probably in the definition section and I missed it, but for this conversation, townhouse versus multifamily. We've got duplex, which everybody knows is 2. Is the definition of multifamily, is there a number associated with that in terms of units? And how does it overlap or not overlap with the townhouse, which can be several units side by side with common walls, right? Could be 3, could be 4, could be 2.
So I will,
Mostly, but not exclusively.
no, this is a great question. I'll share screen again. Let's see. Okay, hold on a sec. While I'm sharing screen, it doesn't want me to increase the size of the screen I'm on.
Yeah, I only asked because I'm not, in my own mind, I'm not clear that I have
Yeah.
everybody knows what a 30-unit apartment building looks like in multifamily, but where's the line? When does a townhouse stop being a townhouse? Turn into a multifamily?
Well, and I'll just say one of the big differences with a townhouse is that you own it.
And it's common law.
Well, they're individually owned, but they can be rented. So
You
there's
can
no-
rent them, but a true townhouse means it's constructed differently with the 2-hour firewalls. You own the ground underneath, and so you can sell it off as
Yeah.
a residence, as a single family residence.
So
But we have a lot of townhouse style apartments around town.
right. So
Yeah.
does the townhouse have a maximum number of units permitted then?
So I don't know if you can see this on your screen, but I've pulled up the definition of townhouse.
I see that.
It's a single family dwelling constructed in a group of 3 or more. It doesn't have a maximum.
Okay.
3 or more attached units in which each unit extends from the foundation to the roof and with open space on at least 2 sides. So they got a front and a backyard. Ownership of a townhouse includes the unit's building and associated property.
Okay.
So that's what differentiates it. So you've got at least 3, there's no max, and it is offered up for home ownership.
That helps. So it's not really a size issue. It's more of a use than.
And an ownership opportunity. Because somebody could come and, buy a row of 4 townhouses and then rent them, but their ownership pieces, each of them separately. And then did you want more info on the multifamily one?
Oh, no, that helps. I think when I looked at one of the things that caught my eye and you made changes, I guess you could elaborate on this, the number 5, the footnote 5, which originally included townhomes, but now does not. Now it's exclusively multifamily. So does this change suggest that the previous restriction, you couldn't build a townhouse directly adjacent to a single family lot, that's been eliminated in this revision? Is that accurate?
Let's go back to,
Because I think all it said before was townhouses and multifamily dwelling units shall not be located adjacent to an existing single family lot. And it's been stricken. Now it's just multifamily, which I understand that. So I just want to make sure I'm clear on the intent.
okay. So you're talking about the number 5 here. Okay.
So right now, the way that it's proposed, townhouses would be permitted on RL.
Yeah, so the idea was to just, eliminate the the townhouses and make it to where you can have townhouses. And then the multifamily refers to the complexes that have 5 or more. So they're more of a little bit of an apartment style.
Okay, I got it. Thank you.
So Kirsten,
Yes.
can you hear me? So when we get into ownership, one of the things I feel I would like to see back in our codes, and I don't know how to do this because I don't know where it falls into what we're discussing tonight and where it falls into what you're talking about. But when we originally did the accessory dwelling units, we said that they were going to be, one of those units was going to be owner occupied. That was in the very original stuff, and then we took it out. So what we've done is we've created a situation where basically you can have a duplex, both sides rental. They're not attached, I understand that, but you have two houses on a property. And my concern is I would like to see us put that back in. So if somebody has an ADU, it's one of those two units is occupied by an owner. First of all, it would start to encourage home ownership. And second of all, it probably will change the maintenance situation to some degree. And I kind of feel the same way on duplexes. If you put them in a residential single-family neighborhood, RS or RL, because my concern is that I can show you an awful lot of duplexes in this town, and the maintenance is just not the same as if there was an owner there. Just my opinion, and I know I'm not popular for that idea, but I can show you too many places around town that make me discouraged. If we end up with rental properties, duplexes in what have traditionally been single-family neighborhoods, and now we're going to allow duplexes and things like that. And so you're saying, well, somebody could come in and buy 4 units of a townhouse complex, which you're going to allow outright in single-family residential. And my concern is that if somebody buys all 4 units and then uses it as a rental property, so all 4 units are now rented instead of one of them being occupied by an owner, you really start to change the dynamics of the community.
So I understand where you're coming from. I'm going to make a recommendation, but then I think it's probably a council discussion to have. I feel like this is a different discussion than what we're doing right here, because it would take a lot more effort to make those changes within the code and have those conversations amongst yourselves and with community members about how you would go about that. But I would note that in 2018, when we did an update to the ADU ordinance, there was a lot of discussion about whether homeownership, like whether or not an owner needed to occupy the main dwelling unit. And in the end, what council proposed did not include that. So I think that's, if you're going into that same discussion with duplexes, that's a bigger discussion I would ask you to have outside of this ordinance. But
Kirsten, can I ask, in terms of state, the direction that the state's going, I know that there was some legislation that had proposed basically that multifamily in any zone at one point. I don't know that it carried forward. But in terms of aligning, so is there any RCW that was passed in the last session or two that would challenge us in terms of what we are able to do in allowing or not multifamily or duplexes or townhouses in single family, in what we would consider to be single family zones now?
Jamie and Terry, feel free to speak up, but basically they've passed legislation to try to encourage more allowances of uses.
Right. Well, that's my point. I guess that's.
Bruce, this is Terry. I think that there was legislation proposed, but my memory is that the legislature instructed, there's a model code for ADUs that was adopted
Right.
Many years ago. And I think the instruction was to update the model code. And part of that, I believe, was going to be eliminate any requirement for owner occupancy, but I just don't have it at my fingertips right now.
No, that's fine. Okay. I just want to, the point there was simply making sure that we're aligning or even the latitude of what our discussion can entail, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah, and if you guys wanted to have that discussion, yeah, it would behoove staff to do the research to find out if that's even allowable to require the ownership piece.
well, and I'm also wondering, I mean, ultimately, I think the state's going to go in a direction, if I look at that could potentially support multifamily in RS. So even the statement that we just looked at that indicated you couldn't do multifamily next to a single family home could potentially become, the state could take our latitude away. And that discussion has already occurred. That's all. I mean, it's a broader statement. It's a broader concept of not just owner occupied, but what's allowed in zones, and the initiative the state is taking to address what they perceive as affordability, and that's all.
No, it's a very good point. There was a lot of different proposed legislation over the last couple of years, and some of it went through, some of it didn't, but it all led toward, let's make things not so restrictive.
Right.
That's all it came down to.
Kirsten, Bruce, I was going to throw in, this is probably a conversation for later, but I think my own opinion about targeted restrictions within existing zones is, I think we need to be very careful about selecting individual. We've had some conversations in previous meetings about certain neighborhoods or have more character than other neighborhoods. And I think that we need to be very careful about trying to effectively create sub-zones or sub-districts and say, well, this particular ADU standard applies to this RL zone, but not this RL zone. I think, to me, that's just another version of redlining. And I think we have to be, whatever we decide is appropriate to protect the fabric of an RL or an RS neighborhood, I think it needs to be applied across the board.
I wasn't suggesting.
No, I wasn't suggesting you were. I'm just saying that's where the conversation seemed to be heading. And I think we just need to be very careful. Redlining, as everyone knows, started out with a strong racial component, but it also worked into class. And what we're talking about is owner versus renter. And I think that is a class discussion. I think we just need to be very careful. That's all I'm saying.
All right.
Yeah. So Kirsten, help us pull out of this one.
I think that you guys need, if you want to have that discussion, you can direct staff to do the research and find out whether they're.
Yeah. Let's go on. I didn't.
Get into that either. My point was, before we start extracting certain things because of some thoughts, we want more research.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's good.
So at this point, I want to just, we're in the land use charts, and I want to remind you that we have 3 different land use charts. And the first one is for residential uses. It's a little bit shorter to go through, but I wanted to point out that each of the land use charts, we're incorporating these 2 mixed use zones as new columns. If you guys went for it, we would end up eliminating everything in the commercial tourist zone. We've got some changes here, regarding the footnotes, and we can look at those quickly before we move on. We already discussed footnote 2. The next one was a change to 4, where it previously said that non-residential uses may be permitted within a live-work dwelling, as long as the applicable zoning district provisions were met. And we're wanting to change that to say it's subject to the permitted uses in the underlying zoning district. So if, say you're like in the RO zone, for instance, and somebody wanted to have, it's a live-work dwelling unit, so they have a residence there, we're just stating that whatever the associated business is would just meet whatever the zoning district is. That just became kind of problematic for us, just the way it was worded. Sometimes you have to start applying them to realize they're problematic. And then we already discussed the tweaking this to remove townhomes, being allowed adjacent to single family dwellings. But those are the footnote changes. But then just going back up here to the top of the chart, some of the differences. So as you guys know, it's underlined, it's new. If it's a strikeout, we're getting rid of it. one of the potential changes would be to allow the multifamily in the RL with those conditions and the live work in the RL with that condition is modified. And then another big one that we wanted to point out is right here is the idea of in the commercial highway zoning district, allowing for multifamily dwelling with a conditional use permit. And Jamie, I'm going to let you talk to that a little bit more so that they can hear your voice instead for a bit.
Well, while you're doing that switch, Kirsten, one of the things with townhouses, and Jamie, you talked about the allowable densities, I think, that are actual. So where is that addressed?
The densities?
Well, yeah, there was something about, what permitting, allowing townhouses in a specific, in a zone, but then functionally not creating an environment that did not allow them to be built. So where is that addressed?
So real quickly before Jamie speaks, with the townhouse, what we're trying to do is make it easier to just have it be an allowed use. This ordinance will not increase the ability to construct more. You'd be able to maybe put basically a 2-unit townhouse on a site. With the housing action plan, we specifically called out, we want to revisit the density and increase the number of units allowed per acre because there is no incentive to build townhomes right now. So
Okay.
that will come.
I'm confusing the two. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's addressed in the housing action plan. You're right. It just, we didn't get to that with this
Okay.
particular.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, Jamie. You're on mute, Jamie. And do you, real quick, do you want me to pull up the map of that one area?
Sure. Because everybody well, that's fine. The highlight on that chart was that the CH zone, we added for the multifamily dwelling or the multifamily dwellings to add them as a conditional use permit in the CH zone. And this is another one of those examples of real world developer or somebody coming into our office asking questions, what they can do with a specific property.
Sorry, I closed that too soon.
That's okay. And so one of those areas is it's on University Way. It's the Motel 6 property. We've had lots of discussions, lots of people, there's residential behind it, and we do have an active person just kind of out there pending that's willing to move forward with going through the conditional use permit process to convert those from hotel rooms to apartments, potentially if they need to convert 2 units into 1 to make them apartments or different. But this particular one to the north, you can see it is already residentially zoned, and the specific property itself's commercial highway. Right now, you can do a hotel, but you can't do multifamily. But the big driver is looking for more housing in Ellensburg, and a way to do that pretty easily would be to be able to convert this to apartments. So, but we didn't want to just outright permit them because sometimes there are conflicts that need to be addressed. So by doing it as a conditional use permit, usually you can head off some of those by conditioning it in a certain way to avoid conflicts with adjoining uses. So this is just one. We've had 2 different people come to us, and like I said, we have one that's kind of out there on hold. They keep checking in with me about once a month to see, have we had any progress on this? Where are you at? You said that you thought you might be going one direction or another. So they're still out pending on that. But that's another real world example of where this would potentially could be beneficial to getting additional housing and apartments, because they don't tend to be very full. Vacancy rate's pretty high at the motel use there.
Yeah, except when they do long-term rentals too. But
Well, that would ease up on our code enforcement needs then if it's a permitted use and they can actually enforce it rather than, and have somebody monitor it for that.
I'm fine doing multifamily in commercial highway. It seems like I see that a lot in other communities. I guess, remind me when there's a conditional use, how do you know how to condition it? There's no.
Well, they require a public hearing, and that goes before the planning commission currently, that process.
They weigh adjacent uses and whether there's going to be conflict, is that?
Yeah, because those are,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, there's, as part of that process, it requires the public hearing, the public notice, and then it allows others in that neighborhood within 300 feet to provide comments. Plus we, as staff, look at each one of these and provide our input and recommendation into them as well. So that's the thought, that public process would drive some of the provisions and conditions specific to specific uses and areas.
So I might add, the conditional use permit section of the land development code has 13 factors. So it's not specific to the use. It's more generalized, but it is supposed to encompass which in the messages of the health, welfare, and of the
I guess
community.
that's what I was
Yeah.
asking. There's guardrails
There are.
on what you're asking for.
And Jamie, I couldn't remember on that. Is that process, is that a planning commission, or did that get flipped over to the hearings examiner? The conditional use?
Currently, that is, conditional uses are still planning commission.
And then potentially appealable to council?
Yes.
I like the idea.
Just for organizational sake, Mayor Tab stepped off, and so leave our Mayor Pro Tem takes over.
Captain, take over.
Okay. Thank you for that, Jamie.
Yeah.
The other things that we did on this page, we can fit a lot in here and miss stuff. Obviously, we put some certain uses that you could potentially do in the mixed use zones. Because it'd be more like a mixing of business and residential, we had put in there townhouses, multifamily, and live work dwellings as being permitted uses, if you think that would be appropriate. And we also, over here, we put manufactured home park as a conditional use permit in the RS and RL. And, you know, Bruce is not here for this part of the discussion, but it goes back to the idea of looking at ways to allow for more manufactured home parks in the city. And this could be up for discussion as well. I just remember that we specifically added it to the housing action plan after discussion with city council in one of the study sessions. The notion of trying to accommodate for more manufactured home park areas in the city.
Could you clarify? Oh, excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt. Could you clarify the distinction between a park? I'm assuming that means a specific number of units or greater, versus our current code allows a manufactured home to be placed on an RS lot, right?
That's correct.
Yeah, or an RL, or.
Yeah.
So we're talking a built park, not just one house or two, maybe.
Yeah, this is referencing a park, and I'm going to stop share real quick so I can look at the, I don't recall, I don't believe there's like a maximum number of units you can have in a manufactured home park, so.
But the difference would be the underlying land is owned by someone other than who owns
Is that
the
the
home,
distinction for
right?
the park?
Yeah.
The land, but not the improvements, or the structures individual.
Well, they could be either way, I think, but the property itself is interesting.
Okay.
And you know, it's all market driven. It's what the owner of the property themselves wants to do with it. And then the conditional use permit, as Jamie and Terry just explained. Okay,
I had a question on the permitted outright for the RH zone for that. I get it. I mean, I get it, but I'm also visualizing a fairly low density, think Rosewood or whatever it's called over there, South Mountain View, spread out, one-story manufactured homes, kind of like they're a little closer together maybe, but it's not high density in the same category as, say, a 40-unit apartment building. And it's 4 stories tall.
Referring to this, I mean, that was already part of code. I'm not really certain how
Okay.
these were arrived at. We came up with those, but let me show you really quickly the code.
Minimum density in RH2 that it would have to meet, right?
I couldn't hear you.
I think there's a minimum density in an RH zone that if you had a manufactured park, you'd have to meet the minimum density, right?
That's true. We can look at that in a minute. But really quickly, manufactured home park means some land where the principal use is the rental of space for occupancy by 2 or more manufactured homes. And that reminds me that when the Planning Commission was having this discussion, they're like, well, maybe it would be okay to have, a manufactured home park with like three units that were out for rent on one lot, just kind of trying to take advantage of vacant existing land without having to go through the whole rezone process. Because as David said, if you already allow for one manufactured home park on an RS zoned property, that came up as a possibility. Like I said, we could have discussion on that, but that's kind of where that came from. And then once again, it's a conditional use permit. And then I would also say that the requirements for current manufactured home parks are much greater in terms of the aesthetics and pedestrian paths and parking than any of the existing parks other than Rosewood were under. Some of the other ones may not have really had many standards in place. But this is something that if you want to give us any direction on, you can do that, or if you're comfortable leaving it that way.
I'm fine with it the way it is, the way you presented.
Okay.
So, first, I did have a question on that one. That does not mean mobile homes, right?
A manufactured home is, there's a little bit of a difference. So in fact, let's look at the definition. I don't want to say it wrong. There's so many definitions. It is a manufactured home required to be titled for the RCW, which has not been previously titled to a retail purchaser. It's not a mobile home. A mobile home is one that's transportable. It's got a chassis. So what we do require is that the manufactured homes, they are built to a certain residential code standard, and we require them be placed on a permanent foundation. And actually, if you look at Rosewood, that meets what we require. And then what they do is they bring in the manufactured home, place it on the permanent foundation, and then they've been building garages, stick built on site to attach to them.
Okay.
Jamie, do you have anything else to add to that?
We don't have anywhere in our code, somebody could put a mobile home park in and have similar requirements as to what you have on the manufactured home park to make sure that it stays nice and property is kept up.
The mobile homes, you mean?
Yeah.
I was under the impression that mobile home manufacturing was phased out. Regulatory, I mean, is that not correct? They're not.
It was, so you won't see any more parks pop up like you have on, would that be Pine down by off
Yeah.
of Mountain View
That was
coming
my
up that street?
understanding.
There's one on University, but why not? Why do we not allow those?
That's a good question. Why?
Mainly they're just being phased, they're so old, they're being phased out. Their wirings have been upgraded, different things. You can't go any older. 1976 is the oldest you can go, even in one of those mobile home parks now, if you were wanting to place one in a
can't-
mobile home, not a manufactured home, but a mobile home park. 76 is the cutoff date, just because of just standards in the industry of building them, and they don't even build
older
Like
than.
say anymore, they don't build mobile homes anymore. They build manufactured homes, but there's no such, you can't find a 2021 mobile home anymore.
Right, that was my point. That was my point, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Any other comments on that section? Okay. And then going a little bit more down this residential use chart, in these 2 mixed use zones, we've included all of these as permitted uses: boarding houses, lodging houses, adult family homes, community residential facilities, and senior citizen assisted housing. We removed sororities and fraternities because we don't have any of those around town. And that also required, if we remove that, it required us to make that change in the parking standards as well. So that section of the code is included purely to eliminate those 2 terms. Is there any feedback on those? And then we also allowed, we just said permitted for home occupation. It's basically a permitted thing. You have to go through a special procedure for home occupation. Even though it says permitted, they have to come to the city and apply for a permit. And there's certain standards that we have in place. And then finally, under temporary lodging, we put bed and breakfast as a permitted use in the RS and RL. And I know there was a lot of discussion on that, and that's where the Planning Commission arrived at, but is there any feedback on that?
For me, I don't see any reason why we would exclude that use from those zones. My question was whether it would make sense to also permit it in the mixed use residential.
That's something you guys can discuss right now. Give us your feedback, or
It's just a thought.
I'd like to consider it.
yeah, and we can easily do that. If like nobody has any issues with adding it, I'll just throw that in there. Okay. Then I'm going to go to the second use table. This is the non-residential. And then the third one is special uses. But under here, so a lot of what we're going to see is these differences between, eliminating the commercial tourist and adding it to commercial highway. But we also have all the uses to take into account for the mixed uses. But I'm going to also let you know that we are proposing to eliminate, let me get to it real quick, general service establishments, and actually separate it out into its various uses. It's kind of a strange term, and it incorporates automobile fueling stations and laundromats and some other retail. So we thought automobile fueling it warranted its own category. Because we have had people ask about this use over time, obviously. And we thought we would add it to the commercial neighborhood zone, which we don't have very much of. It would be added to the commercial highway, and as well as the CC and CC2. So we do have those. And then we put the regional center mixed use and then the light industrial as well. So, this use chart could take a lot of our time if we wanted to go through it individually. So I started out with this one, but it's just to kind of let you see that there might be things that you want to think about and ponder before, we could potentially finish this up tonight, but it is on your schedule for next week as well to take, maybe half an hour, maybe 40 minutes to also discuss.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
What does it mean when you have P underlined?
Okay. Yeah, great. So the underlined one means this is something being proposed to be added. If it's like a P right here, it already exists in the code as the code is today. And then if there's a line through it, we're proposing to eliminate that. Now in the commercial tourist, you'll see that everything's eliminated. But then you'll see if it's underlined, it would be new.
But you still have commercial highway in there.
Yeah, that's retained.
Commercial highway is what we want to have the commercial tourist zones go to. But when they were having the discussions, like automobile fueling is new. So they're like trying to determine where it would be appropriate to call those out, because we felt part of the reason we pulled it out of general service establishments is that's a very different impact on a neighborhood than a laundromat, in our opinion. So the planning commission sat down and tried to determine where these different uses would be appropriately allowed. So
I had
we've
a
got
question-
that going on.
I had a question on the definition of fueling. Would that also include electric vehicle charging stations in the same category?
I mean, I think that we could do that. Yeah, I mean, they're very similar. I mean, the big challenge with automobile fueling is you got to put the tanks underground and meet all those requirements, but you're still going to have the same kind of impact with an electric one. So I think it would make sense to, if
Yeah,
somebody came to us, we would say, yeah, that's the category it fits into.
Other than the fumes and things, you'd have the same traffic impacts eventually.
Yeah.
The con-
Yeah, definitely different SEPA impacts, but
Mhm.
similar in terms of impact to a neighborhood.
So I guess I would just, in the definitions, if that's the intent of the definition of automobile fueling, that we consider that, adding that or including that, recharging or whatever that, I don't know, whatever it ends up being.
Yeah, no, that's great. And we can, to be honest, we don't have a definition for automobile fueling. Not every single one of these has one, because, we're like, okay, a coffee house, there's no definition because we just kind of assume we know what it is.
Mhm.
So if it's got the little asterisk, that means there's a definition in the code. And we didn't have one like for auto cells or the auto fueling. So that's more of a staff just call. And it makes sense to us. Unless you specifically want us to add a definition, we can do that.
Not necessarily, but if there ever came to be a question about whether a charging station fell under that definition, it would be good to know that. Or, or it's just staff call.
We'll look into that and see if there's any good definitions out there. There's nothing wrong with adding it.
My sense is that 20 years from now, we're going to have dozens of charging stations around the community and not just one or two or four. And I just don't know what that's going to look like.
It's
Yeah.
been further than that.
Yeah.
They've already peaked in the number of gas stations in the US.
Yeah.
And GM's only going to produce electric
Right.
vehicles by 2035.
Yeah, I think you're probably going to see demand for charging stations in residential neighborhoods, in fact. So potentially that's a chapter for another day, probably.
So I'm not gonna worry about adding fueling stations to the CC zone. To me, I'm not sure I would, that it's appropriate in the central commercial, but But if there were-
Most
if no-
gas
if-
stations would want to go in there
Yeah.
because of access and getting in and out and traffic and everything else.
and if we're not building anymore, then. Okay,
My recollection is there was a lot of discussion on that at the commission level. And if you guys wanted to go a different direction, you just tell us that.
I wouldn't want to preclude the electric charging though, so it's fine.
Okay. And what I'm going to do, I mean, we don't have time to go through every little change, but I just kind of wanted to give you a feel for what we're doing, with the automobile fueling. But I'm going to talk about the different changes to the uses. We did eliminate heavy service because it's actually included in another category later. It was basically duplicated. And then there was discussion about why would nurseries have to be associated with a retail use? So they wanted to just eliminate that part of nurseries and greenhouses. And then in our office, we received, whenever we get a proposal for a restaurant, bar, or brew pub, those are not necessarily the same things. And then the planning commission had a lot of discussion on this, and they just wanted to separate out restaurants from bars and brew pubs, because they did want to propose, and this is something where you guys might have a different feel, is allow restaurants in the RS and RL zones, but not allow bars and brew pubs in those zones. So if it's a neighborhood little restaurant, maybe it's an Einstein Bagels or something like that. A lot of people on the commission had talked about seeing those kinds of uses in neighborhoods, or coffee houses, which right here, coffee house, they changed the condition on this one and then added it to the RL zone. So if those are things, if you want to talk about them, we can do that. But I'm kind of wanting to focus more on categories, and there's so many of these changes that, what you could do is decide if we want to like discuss, review this over the next week and come back to the next study session after you've had a chance to really get into this. And now that you know exactly what it means, Mary, if it's underlined or if it's struck out. We also decided there wasn't much point in allowing or even calling out an outlet center, because that would just be a large scale retail. So we just removed that from the use chart period. Now, I know this came up earlier in the discussion about your super scale in the commercial highway zoning district as being allowed where it didn't used to be, but it was in the commercial tourist. So if I don't think we resolved that earlier. So if there's that's one you want to have further discussion on and come back to at the next meeting.
I do want further discussion. I guess the locations of the commercial highway is very different than what was the commercial tourist, which was only the interchanges. And so I guess if it were a conditional use in all of the categories, including the new one, the RCMU, I don't have a lot of heart to relitigate the entire big box store arguments. And this seems to open a Pandora's box to me. And you'd have to give me a really good argument to just permit it anywhere.
Yeah. And if you guys want to change it to conditional use permit, we can certainly do that. And then the other thing that I was thinking we could look at is, are there any properties large enough, outside the interchange areas that would accommodate for a structure of that size? And we could look at that.
Leave it only in the regional retail overlay zone. And if we need to tweak the requirements of that zone, let's have that discussion.
Maybe what we could do is add a condition that refers it to saying that. So what we do is sorry, this is really long. Add a brand new condition down here that would refer to the regional retail area. Like you can only do it.
Zone and subject to all of those conditions, but otherwise just an outright permitting anybody according to whatever design standards is not the discussion the community had in the past.
I would agree with that. And I think it also applies to that mixed use permitted on the.
Okay. No, that's great.
Entirely, yeah.
Is
So
everyone else comfortable with making those changes?
Would that, as far as the code goes, would that be permitted with the footnote, or would that be a conditional with footnote?
Well, what we could do is just put a footnote and say it's permitted and describe it in the footnote. It's only permitted with the caveat as part of regional retail overlay.
Yeah, I like that.
And further describe it, because that's different than a conditional use permit, because the regional retail itself has a whole slew of standards and procedures to go through that are pretty onerous, and it would be coming before you guys.
I think that covers it on that. To me, that gives it what we're trying to accomplish as far as.
Okay.
So
Like,
I'm okay talking about it because I don't agree, but so bring it forward as a point of discussion, then that's fine.
So you're-
okay,
You're wanting to open the regional retail.
I want to have the conversation because I don't think regional retail is the same. I don't think the likelihood of regional retail and the form that it's going to take looks anything like it did 15 years ago or 20 years ago. I think that we have a different
It was
economy.
only 10, but
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
okay. I agree that it's not the same.
Well, we've been talking
landscape.
about it for 20 years.
Yeah, I agree. I think the issue is scale. What it is going to change. The scale is the issue.
So I just want to have the conversation. I realize I may be in the minority. That's fine.
so we'll call out some of these for discussion at the next meeting, and I'm going to go through the use chart a little bit more in terms of uses, but I would ask that before the next meeting, really look through this chart. It seemed like we were pretty good to go in the residential one, but there's a lot to this non-residential use chart, and be looking that over. And honestly, if there's anything that concerns you that comes up after this meeting is over, if you could let Heidi know so we could just kind of research why that was discussed and we were prepared to talk about it, that would be great. But yeah, we'll definitely bring this up for a point of discussion at the next meeting. And then I just wanted to point out, like, this general service establishments is the one that we decided to get rid of. So everything's just, you know, struck out. And then this heavy services, we already had this. It's really odd. So that's why we got rid of heavy service up here. We don't know how that ended up. Under the hotel motel right here, I'll just point this out. You know, we did want to add it to these 2 new mixed use zones. Thought that was a good fit. Just don't have time for everything, but laundromats and dry cleaners was another one that you might want to look at, that we pulled out of general service establishments. Like I said before, we didn't think it was in the same category as a gas station. So, and I'll just say there was a ton of conversation at the planning commission level about this topic at more than one meeting, just because there's different ideas and perceptions about laundromats and the impact, like what they used to have with all the chemicals versus what they do now to clean products. I don't know, but they had a ton of discussion. So that's where they arrived at these. That might be something for you to look at for the next meeting, where they said they'd be permitted. Let's see, just want to give you the bigger ones. We also proposed to add a new completely new category that's a little bit different than light industry. It's light manufacturing. And they came up with these potential areas that it would be permitted, and a couple of them had a footnote attached to it. And then we obviously changed some of the footnotes, so you'll want to pay attention to that. So with the light industry, the changes we made there. And in terms of light manufacturing, the definitions are found in the proposed code, and I'll just read that to you real quickly. So light manufacturing would be a light industrial business where all processing, fabricating, assembly, or disassembly of items takes place wholly within an enclosed building. It does not involve the use or production of flammable, explosive, or other hazardous materials, and it might include an ancillary restaurant or retail use through which the goods produced on site are sold or served to the public on site. And we had actually received a few requests of that nature, and it did not fit into the light industrial category. So we were just trying to offer up another potential area for development there. That's where we came up with that light manufacturing. And you might want to look at the, you know, the zoning districts that we've got laid out there.
So can I ask you, what sort of business is that? I mean, just give me an example. I'm not understanding.
Okay, yeah, this may sound strange, but I got a request once about somebody that wanted to manufacture guitar strings on site and sell them on site, and that doesn't take a lot of room, and it's a very little impact on the neighbors. So just something like basic like that.
Okay.
So it's like really low scale manufacturing that really is not much of an impact on the neighborhood. So good question. That's where, as we've encountered questions, we've come up with a lot of these potential changes.
So
And
would
then
that not be a home, potentially just a home office, home business?
those typically with home occupation permit, they don't typically involve really production on site. And that one I gave you was pretty low key. I'm not really thinking of other examples that we've come up with, but that don't fall into the category of home occupation permit. It just gives us another category to have as allowable and to suggest to people that come to us. Jamie, can you think of any yourself that would fall into that category for light manufacturing, a type of use? I don't know if you've received any of those types of calls. You're on mute.
Can I suggest bookbinding?
Yeah,
That was one that Gary Williams used to talk about, like manufacturing.
mhm.
Why couldn't you do it in his retail business?
Yeah, when we're processing home occupation permits, it's interesting the things that get proposed to us. Jamie, did you have anything to say since you were on mute? You're still on mute, Jamie.
I'm going to say, I think it's been around a while, but the makers movement, you know, the sort of small scale artisan manufacturing, I think would fall into that category.
Yes.
Masks,
Absolutely.
bookmarks.
Jamie?
No, I don't have anything to add. I was just trying to recall. I know there was conversation I came in on the tail end of this ordinance deal, but did get in on some of these discussions at planning commission levels when I first came in, and there were discussions around this. I just can't remember exactly. Fred had something specific that met this as well. So
Yeah. So there's a lot of discussion on that. And I would, like I said, encourage you to read through which zones you think that would be appropriate in for the next meeting. And then another item that we added, so we're now to the special use category, which includes park, open space, recreational, cultural and entertainment, educational, governmental, resource and regional. But going back up here, we as staff fielded many calls about, hey, can I have a yoga studio or a small scale dance class, you know, offerings for dance classes in a building like 2,000 square feet or smaller. And when you have a building that size, the parking requirements are not as great because it's usually based on how many parking spaces per so many square feet. And we had to tell people no a lot. And so what we have right now for indoor recreation is commercial. It's really more geared toward like your 24-hour fitness, the gym. I can't remember the one with the name on Dollarway, but this kind of accounts for, you know, small business owners looking to do that type of business, and we've had to tell them no often. So that's where we came up with this. And the Planning Commission thought, well, if it's that small scale, they basically proposed allowing in all of the zoning districts. So something for you to think about as well. And then we didn't come up with this, but the Planning Commission did. When we were looking through this chart, one of our commissioners asked why museums were not allowed in the residential zoning districts. And she said that in Europe, a lot of times a house might be converted into a very small scale museum that kind of honored what took place there in that house or in the neighborhood. And so what we did was we came up with a solution of calling it out as a conditional use permit with a footnote 12. I'll go down to footnote 12 here. 12 it states that their museums are allowed in those RS, RL, RM, and RH zoning districts only if the building is 2,000 square feet or less and through approval of a conditional use permit. So that was something that they talked through quite a bit, and they all came to an agreement on that. Then we also looked at theaters, and previously they had only been allowed, so you'll see all of these are new with one strike through. It had only been allowed in the commercial tourist district, which we are eliminating. And we currently have a theater on Mountain View Avenue that is currently zoned commercial neighborhood, which we're planning to change to commercial highway. So there was discussion on allowing it in anywhere from the RO to all the way through all the commercial zoning districts and the mixed use zoning districts. So, and then let's see this light industrial, interesting. Even if, I don't know if that would happen, you might say something different, but a conditional use permit in the light industrial. So that came up as well. And then let's see, that was the extent of the big changes. There are several others we want you to look through, but that's getting at all of the use chart changes that we had proposed. And before I go away from those, are there any questions or concerns about any of the things we just talked about in the use charts?
I would just, it's not serious, but observation in the museum, permitting the museum and the residential, I think that's fine. I think the 2,000 square foot maximum is arbitrary. It strikes me that a lot of the grand houses of years past that are no longer viable for personal, occupancy, quite often could be converted into museum. I just think the 2,000 square feet is just an arbitrary number.
Well, I scrolled up on the screen because we went with 2,000 because it kind of aligns with small scale business offices, which are 2,000 square feet or less. And then also get up to the retail. We also have 2,000 square feet or less as small scale retail. I wasn't here when those numbers were arrived at. I don't know if there was a lot of discussion at, community or council level, but we've got these in here already. So we went with the same numbers. Same thing for the small scale recreational facility. And was that Nancy that was trying to speak?
I agree, so like if the Shouty Mansion were to be converted to a museum, how many square feet would it be?
It's 3,800 square feet.
There you go.
And so would you say, well, only 2,000 of that can be museum and the rest has to be something? That's the whole point of having the museums in the residential areas is to capture those grand houses like distances. So
yeah, and if you guys would like, we could just get rid of the footnote and it's just a plain old conditional use permit. And just you take it because every lot is unique, every building is unique, and that allows for you
I think
to
the
have
footnote,
that
I
conversation.
think the footnote is fine because it explicitly identifies them as permitted, but I think you just strike the square footage minimum or maximum rather.
which is what that's what 12 does.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's just a conditional use permit and it's judged.
Yeah, I guess if the intent is to require conditional use permit.
Just get rid of 12 and then it does, if it's 2,500 square feet, that's not a problem, or it's 3,400 or whatever the Shouty Mansion was.
Yeah, I think so.
It's 36 or 38 or something.
Okay. We could do that.
Yeah, I would say it's not the same as the train depot, for example, but it's the same kind of conversation. It's like at some point, the value of preserving a historic structure, it doesn't always fit perfectly with the intended residential or commercial use, So I don't think it would be comparable to a 2,500 square foot retail establishment necessarily, in the same way as an example. So I'm good with.
Okay, we can make that modification before the next meeting. And like I said, I'd like you guys to look through these and come back with changes, but that did remind me of another that I wanted to just draw your attention to is under public transportation passenger terminals. We're adding it to the new mixed use zone, and we are also suggesting adding it to these two industrial zones. And kind of in keeping with the possibility of Hope Source going out to the train depot, that property itself is CC2, but there's always the possibility they might have need to expand onto additional property that's zone light industrial or heavy right adjacent to it. So that is in there as well. But please look through all of those. And then the other thing we'll talk about at the next meeting, which is important, is 15.320. And because we're adding the new mixed use zones, okay, forgive me while I scroll really fast. We are going to be making some modifications because we're adding the mixed use zone. So we're pulling out commercial Taurus, CC and CC2 out of the commercial, industrial, and public reserve zones. And then we're adding them to a new mixed use chart. And so we want to talk through how we arrived at that stuff too. And there's not too many changes, but there's a couple I know that you'll have comments on. So we will talk about those there. And then finally, the last little thing I wanted to make sure you're aware of is that we are going to need to make some changes to the sign code, just simply in terms of the reference to the commercial tourist zone. Right now, there is a provision that people can request a sign up to 100 feet high in the commercial tourist zone with a conditional use permit. And so if you eliminate the commercial tourist zone, we have to change that section of the sign code. And we don't have any intention of getting into any other changes to the sign code with this particular round, because we just want to focus on the zoning and land use charts. The sign code is its own topic that we would look at separately later. But any last minute feedback for us that you would like us to change before the next meeting? I really appreciate all the conversation so far.
Looks like we're good. Kirsten, would you mind reviewing what we're supposed to study for the next session? The
Yeah.
conversation that we've agreed to have?
I mean, obviously, you're more than welcome to read the entire thing and come with any feedback. I think we covered the generalities, but just look through the use table for specifically the non-residential and the residential, and look at the uses that were permitted, that we're proposing to add as permitted or strike out, with the brand new uses that we're proposing to add, and just make sure that there's nothing that's just glaringly obvious to that you would like to see changed, and just come back with your feedback. This, like I said, this is a result of 11 planning commission, well, actually probably more meetings and some public input, but we want to make this work for the neighborhoods. We don't want to do anything crazy. So look at that. And then also please look at 15.3.20, the use charts.
One thing I would just ask you to check on is 15.350.030, the airport overlay zone. I know that when the original code was written and adopted, it was intended to mirror the county's language. And I know that very language has been revised because I revised it for the county last year. What I don't know, and this is what you need to check on, is whether they ever adopted it. I don't know if it was adopted, but there's significant difference in what's here versus what eventually will be adopted by the county. And I would say if it hasn't been adopted by the county, just leave it alone. It'll get caught later.
Okay, and then I will note the only reason we include that section in this ordinance is just because we had to change a reference to like another section of the code. It's like we're changing like one little reference,
Yeah,
but this is good. Yeah, if we need to change it, we'll look into it, and that would probably be a different ordinance.
Yeah, that would be fine. I think it's easy. It literally gets cut and pasted. I mean, once it's adopted by the county, because the goal has always been that the two ordinances, county and city, are identical in terms of the safety zones and the restrictions.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for pointing that out. We'll look into it.
Okay.
Jamie, do you have anything to add? Last minute?
No, I don't have anything more. I know there's a lot of information processed and appreciate everybody going through it and pointing out some of these specifics for us to look more into, and we'll do that to bring back maybe some examples of these questionable areas too. So look forward to further discussion on it.
I'll speak for
Okay.
myself. I can just say I appreciate all the work you guys have put in on this, and certainly planning commission, but it's quite a bit of work. So thank you for all that.
Yeah, thank you for sure. So the discussion of the regional retail will be at another meeting at some point in time.
The next meeting. Yeah, I didn't bring that up. Yeah. You asked what to review. Let's just in terms of that one use, because if we're getting rid of the commercial tourist, we need to know what to do with that large scale retail.
And the inclusion of the bed and breakfast in the mixed use. I had that down as a discussion also, that we had some questions about that.
Were there questions on that?
Thought so.
And there was something Rich specifically wanted to be able to come back
The
to.
regional retail.
Just the
discussion here.
area wide, right?
All right.
And I was generalizing. I can actually just type up a list of everything you wanted to come back to discuss, and we can have Heidi send it out.
That would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be rad. Yes,
All
please.
right, are we ready to move on?
Move out.
Wow.
Out. City Manager Heidi had something else for us.
Oh,
tonight.
I don't believe I have anything to report. One item
Oh, I thought we were you wanted to talk about the retreat. You said,
Oh, no, in our one-on-ones.
for your one-on-ones, for your
Oh.
next meeting.
oh, okay. All right, great. Yeah, and then we are adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Kirsten.
Thanks, Kirsten. Thanks, Jamie.
Thanks.
Bob.